Greetings, dear hearts. Welcome to the online wisdom gathering, Africa Rise, the wisdom and spirit of a continent ready to shine again. A gathering of wisdom keepers, visionaries, practitioners from various backgrounds who are in service to the global awakening of consciousness and to supporting people and our planet during these times of great change. In this event, we put a special focus on Africa. During these few days together, we'll tune into divine wisdom, the suppressed ancient history and mysteries, and the richness and potency of this continent, her people, her cultures, ancient civilizations, her wildness, her stories and dreams, her spirituality, and her heart, so that we may remember our most ancient origins and the significance of this sacred land in these times of prophecy we're in, so that we may understand its role also in the greater order of things and why this continent is rising once again to its rightful place. I'm your host and creator of this event, Clara Nisiri, and in this session, I'm delighted to be with Mishka Elaine Latib. Am I saying your second name correctly, by the way? Okay, great. Mishka, it's so good to see you. And yeah, looking forward to this session with you and learning about what you're going to be sharing.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And for those who don't know you, I'm going to introduce you with your bio. Mishka Elaine is a multidimensional wisdom keeper and spiritual guide on the path of healing, transformation, and upliftment of consciousness on the planet at this time. She is the founder of the Psychedelic Society of South Africa and has been a voice, leader, and anchor for New Earth community over the last few years. With a background in plant medicine facilitation, shamanism, sound and vibration medicine, spirit channeling, and multimodality energy healing, she brings forward a widened spiritual understanding for all beings on the path of ascension at this time. Her greatest wish is to see each person come back into their own soul and heart alignment, love and harmony, so a new collective reality may be born. Beautiful, Mishka. And you will be sharing your perspectives with us on evolving planetary consciousness. So I'd love if we could begin with setting a bit of a personal context. What has been your journey? You're very dedicated to supporting people during this time of awakening through your initiatives. It's more than one. And yeah, how did this all begin? Share with us a bit about your own path and what's brought you where you are now.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So for me, it's been a very long and interesting journey of coming to the space that I am now. And plant medicines have been really central to my initiation and my awakening. And that's obviously why, I felt the call to start the Psychedelic Society was actually to allow what had passed through me and initiated me to be able to reach others in a way that was, yeah, safe and held and done with absolute respect and integrity as best as we can. And I suppose for me, I've always had this longing in my heart, which I think so many of us have had, of a new way of being, of a different way of being, of feeling like the reality that I was in was not what was felt inside me. It's this dissonance of, hearing people speak a certain way and feeling like there's just something that's not right. It doesn't feel like me. And, like many of us, I think spending many years of my life playing a role that was just inauthentic to some capacity. But of course, getting comfortable within that, I went to UCT, I studied engineering, I thought I was going to play the part. At my core, I was always, filled with love and service. I was always involved in initiatives from a young age of whether it was, Greenpeace, helping with the environment, or animal rescue, or activism for education. I was always involved in something or another, but there was always this distance between me and the things that I was doing and this person that I was supposed to be, especially moving into adulthood. It was like, okay, now I need to think about money, career, reputation. One of the reasons why I started in engineering is I thought, let me get a respectful degree so that people will take me seriously when I'm older, when I want to do things to help people, And so there's this idea that you have to be someone in order to do good in the world. And so I went on a long journey and obviously got lost on the way as well. It tends to happen where you kind of you go into the world and then you get consumed by it as well. And on my journey, I came across substance when I was in university, and that was a big changing point for me. I also, at the same time, started going through mental health challenges for the first time, which was incredibly, in a sense, humiliating and debilitating for me. Went through things like a panic disorder, which is, of course, if you've ever experienced a panic attack, it's not something very pleasant, and not something that I really wish on anyone. And depression as well, and eventually the diagnosis of bipolar, and a couple other things with medication that came along with it. And that was quite a process to get into that space of humbling myself enough to realize that I needed help, which I think sometimes is the initiation of mental health. And then a longer process of then working through another big part of my journey was also simultaneously working through the drug realm. So I came across substance, got very interested in substance. I started smoking marijuana, realized that I had a gift of being able to try something and then be able to explain it quite in depth to other people. And so, people at varsity would come to me and ask me about things, and I'd be able to tell them about it, advise on dosage, say what it does. And, in another realm, I think that I would have probably been that child that would have been taken aside and taught about plants and taken by an elder and trained. But that was not the environment that I was in. And so my natural ability came online without any guidance or support. And I was sucked into the world of drugs, and I still had that inside, that in me, that inside of wanting to help people. And so even though I was in the drug realm, I was the one that was importing the test kits and trying to get things tested so that gangs would be more responsible with what they were giving to people in South Africa. And, like trying to work from the inside of whatever environment that I was put into. And again, it's this feeling deep in my chest of knowing that there's something that I want to see in the world, something better, something greater, but having absolutely no guidance, support, or know-how. And so many of my first intense psychedelic experiences and initiations were, yeah, through accidents and pushing myself too far. People were doing it for recreation, and I was having these kind of deeper spiritual experiences. And eventually, after, getting thrown around by life quite a bit, and thankfully good parents moving me out of that space, I then started contacting people that were a little bit more healthy, you could say. And for the first time I was encountering what I call human guides to really help me on that process. And that's when I really went a layer deeper. And for the first time, I did a high dose mushroom journey. And in that journey, I got welcomed by a group of spirits, essentially, and that said, like, now you're ready to communicate with us. And I was like, excuse my language, but what the fuck? What's just happened to me? And that was like really the rude awakening that then sent me into realizing that there was something else going on. And it wasn't just my feeling of something else was coming, but really now I had these beings that were undeniable to me anymore that could really tell me that something else is coming, and you're here for a purpose and you're here for a mission. And that's when, yeah, I guess from that point, my whole life changed. And I went from a place of trying to put the pieces together to realizing that, okay, now I'm in flow. Now I've got to do things and actualize myself. And from then, it's been a journey of receiving messages. I spent a year channeling galactic beings, and then also working through different plant spirits that started opening up for me. And each step required quite an intense initiation process to open up the channels and to receive the information. And by no means was it necessarily an easy path. People often meet me and they say, "Oh, but you're open to these things." It was probably like it's you're just naturally like that. And I could say no, I wasn't. It required, deep surrender, deep breaking, deep many times of absolutely freaking out, thinking I was going completely insane, and learning what it is to open up. And for me, being on this path has really opened my heart to wanting it to be easier for others, especially those that are going through similar, that have no guidance. So for me, the psychedelic society as well, without guidance, we're working with such powerful teachers, plant teachers, not having any form of support or holding or, process to work through is yeah, it was really hard for me. And I guess that's where my calling came from, is to be that way shower for others who might be able to come through with a gentler hand, with some support, with some reflection as well. And beyond that, then things started opening up for me. The callings came. It's also how I met you as well, was through the Andean tradition. And initiations came there. Finally, some human guides that can give me some information, as to what I was experiencing, and give me a more solid foundation level understanding to grow with. And yeah, my journey has been kind of spread from that innate desire in my heart to see what I feel on the inside and know to be true, to be reflected into the external environment. And that's come through many forms, through the products that I've made to help people, through the education that I put out, the workshops that I facilitate, to the ceremonies that I hold, to the network of facilitators that I connect with, and then through the community that I've been a part of, constructing and helping heal for a long time through many different means. And that's kind of led me up to today. And the work that I'm currently doing now, which is more in a capacity of providing resource and education to those that are also on this mission and helping those that are ready to step into the roles that I have been activate themselves. Because for me, it's basically require what I call a spiritual army to be able to make a real change. Although I don't like the word army just because I don't like the idea of war, but in essence, we need a collective to really change the global game that we're playing into something that feels more resonant with what our hearts are really calling for.
So
Yeah, I guess that's my story.
and this has all then led you to creating Psychedelic Society SA. And how does Psychedelic Society SA work? What work are you doing? You've touched on it here and there, but could you elaborate a little bit on that?
So the Psychedelic Society of South Africa was born out of the intention to create a space for people to start talking about psychedelics in a way that didn't seem like it needed to be shadowy or hidden. So it was really bringing this conversation into the public light initially. Now when we speak about it in South Africa, it's a normal conversation. You hear doctors speaking about it, and it's become kind of normalized. A couple of years ago, it wasn't the case. Just by putting the society out there was already permission for people to talk about it. And that was initially the goal, was a sand, a flag in the sand saying, look, we're here, we're speaking about it, it's public, it's open. Let's not be so ashamed of this any longer. And then providing actual resources for those that really needed help. So it was a way for us to also allow people to make contact with us, to ask questions, to seek help, especially for those that are, the amount of messages we received of people that have been trying, medication for 15 years or deeply suicidal or this or that, and just unable to get help from the system, and, being able to provide pathways to alternative care potentially, in a space where our legal system is still very far away from being able to provide this information in a way that's, accessible for potentially quite still a while. And so for me, it was education, it was community, it was connection, and actually getting the healing to the people that actually needed it. And also autonomy of consciousness, allowing people to explore their own consciousness in a way that is held and safe. Because at the end of the day, my perception is that we're not going to stop people from doing it, because people are people and they're going to do it anyway. But what we can do is provide them the resources to do it in a way that is safe and held and supported and encouraged in a healthy way. And so for me, that was really my purpose. And it did come to me in a ceremony. It was something that I was told that I need to do. And I thought, who am I? Who am I as this young person to do something this audacious? And it was quite an insight for me, because I soon after that saw a talk on psychedelics in South Africa, which I thought was amazing. And I went to the talk, and it was a lovely talk, but there were questions in the audience that the person speaking could not answer. And me, at my little tender age, I could give them the answers that they needed. And that was quite a big breaking process, because I didn't have all the answers. I didn't have the guidance, but I knew in my heart that I could be of some kind of service. And so that was the starting point. And I did it. I registered it. I put it in the sand, and I opened myself to it. And all I got back from the universe was absolute support and encouragement. All the right people came. I've met the most amazing medicine people over the years. We've had amazing work come through the country. We've helped tens of thousands of people, at different points of their process. And yeah, there's a really strong community in South Africa now of plant medicine people, of psychedelic providers of all sorts of things. Um, and yeah, it's growing and changing every day. We run online courses now. We have community events. It's thriving.
Amazing. So maybe this should have been the first question. To backtrack a moment, and for those who maybe are not so familiar what we're talking about, how would you define a psychedelic and plant medicine? And yeah, let's go into that for a moment, because you do define we define psychedelic and plant medicine. Tell us about the differences, different effects,
Mm.
just briefly for those who are unfamiliar. Hmm.
So when I speak about psychedelics and plant medicines, I'm talking about the larger category of mind-opening substances. So mind manifesting is psychedelic. So it includes your things such as your MDMA. It covers as well your plant medicines as well, such as your like a San Pedro, your Hachuma, your ayahuascas, fungi medicine as well as like mushrooms, magic mushrooms, as most people know, which is the most popular in South Africa at this time. It covers your things like iboga. It also covers your class of other psychedelics, which is lesser known, like your 2CBs. There's a whole lot that falls under that category. And when it comes to the Psychedelic Society, we also provide information around things which are part of technically we're looking at different classes. So for people that are getting a bit more technical, things like ketamine is technically not underneath the same class of substance, but we are covering that whole category. Basically, what we're talking about are substances that affect your consciousness in a very specific way that open it up into what I call high level information or allow network connectivity to happen in a different way. So it affects your consciousness in some way. These are the substances we're talking about, and both for recreational use, which some people, it's autonomy of consciousness, and also now mainly people are aware of psychedelics because of the therapeutic use and things like Silicon Valley was a big part of that as well in terms of microdosing and opening up creativity and opening up different forms of thinking and problem solving. And yeah, so I tend to say it's not just for therapy use, but for the most part, we're speaking about these substances that are used for opening consciousness in some way. Yeah.
Great. So you've given us a little bit of context also in terms of what's happening in the scene around the world. How do you see the scene, this field here in South Africa or even in Africa, if you can share about that? And also in terms of legality, perhaps some people are wondering about that.
Mm. Yeah, so when it comes to legality, we've had cases in South Africa for a number of years that have been trying to legalize primarily magic mushrooms because it's the most popular and commonly used substance here, and but also for other entheogens. Of course, we've had the Dhaka case as well, which has kind of gone through, and it's still now we're seeing the battles that are happening around the legalization process. It's legal, but now there's dispensaries, and there's a whole thing that's now unfolded because of the legalization process, and we have had cases for many years. There are different schools of thought when it comes to this. And for me, decriminalization is the way that I see us. I prefer the country to go towards, where it's really allowing us to have substances within our power and control. So we're still able to use it without being prosecuted for it. The issue that I see with legalization and the benefit, there's also obviously benefits as well, is that there's standardization and we can talk about this publicly and get help from like mental health professionals in a way that yeah, can really support a lot of people, and more research can be done, more accessibility can be made. On the other side, the problem with legalization in that capacity is that sometimes the price does go up because sometimes the only way you can access it is through medical means, which is not great for those that can't afford that or don't have access. Yeah, legalization also happens. And then also prosecution and persecution still happens for those that are maybe not doing it in the way that is deemed fit by the government. And again, it's yes, maybe your mushrooms might be better grown if it's legalized, but at the same time, these are substances that you can eat from the earth. They don't have to be, lab tested for absolute accuracy. These are ancient medicines. And so for me, I do have the hesitation around the legalization process. It has benefits, but also some of its dangers. And so at this moment, the court case has been rolling on the same way it has, I think, for the last, I think it's now 13, 14 years. Um, and it's still the same things that the court are saying is that psychedelics have I think it's the three things are no medicinal value, that they're harmful and addictive, and I can't remember the third one. But basically, all three things that are currently in the case are null and moot. And a simple Google search will give you a ton of research articles which prove otherwise. The problem with legalization in South Africa is that we don't necessarily have the capacity from a governmental side to actually implement that legalization process, because that requires a whole lot of documentation, a whole lot of thinking, a whole lot of researchers coming in to do analysis. How do you roll this out into a population wide scale? And I really saw the insides of this because I spent some time in the Caribbean working with the government in St. Vincent to roll out a similar program. And they wanted to open psychedelics up and become a tourist hotspot for people to come for healing and access. And while in theory that was really good, when you got down to the practicalities of that, when you're working on a population size scale, you're dealing with a country which is like filled with religion, and how do you deal with people that are going to be scared of what's going to come? And there's a whole undercurrent that you also have to deal with when you make these big changes collectively. And then how do we deal with children that are curious? And how do, then it just extends and extends and extends. So it's a deep thinking process that needs to occur, and the infrastructure and the resources need to be there for them to be able to make these decisions. So it might seem like a small decision, but in the background, it actually is quite a big shift around it. And so for me, the main thing would be if, we do have a petition on the website, but also for anyone that is looking at actually taking these cases forward in some capacity is more for decriminalization. We have Decriminalized Nature SA, like they have in the States, and that's got some traction to it. But yeah, really, if there is going to be a push, it would be for just allowing us to work with it without being prosecuted. There is also the other side to it, which I did learn very beautifully, and of course, as being part of the Psychedelic Society, is that in South Africa, and I say this kind of a little bit tongue in cheek, but we get away with a lot. It's not like the US where a lot of these things are highly restricted, or other parts of Europe or China, or we get away with a lot here. And as long as you're doing things with the right kind of intention and the right kind of integrity, and the community you're in isn't one that's scared and is going to, out you or prosecute you because of some kind of fear or projection, we tend to be okay. We tend to be okay. There are thousands of kilograms of mushrooms being eaten every week in South Africa by people that are going on journeys. And that's just a fact. It's not my choice or anything that I'm involved in, but it is just a fact. And there are ceremonies happening every few days in every city in this country. So it's happening. We have such a large underground scene. There's so many people that are receiving healing and benefit. There's so many people that are making use of this. And this is excluding the festival scene, which is another story altogether. That we are blessed in some capacity. So, so I say, and more I am meeting people who are medical doctors that are coming to the talks, that are psychiatrists that are coming to the talks, and even they are finding ways to subtly suggest things to their clients and wanting to know what languaging they can use to be able to provide support without getting penalized. Because even they are trying to find ways. They know these things work, but they need to be able to do it in a way that still fits within legality and to ensure that people are safe. But a lot of them are willing to put themselves on the line, to see people actually get the healing that they need. And I find that very inspiring, that we have collectives of people that are willing to suggest things that the government might not yet be comfortable with us suggesting to each other, and to talk about it.
Mm. Yeah, interesting how, there's kind of been the plants are leading some kind of cause, that's taking us towards higher consciousness. And how would you say plant medicines and psychedelics play a role in evolving consciousness on the planet at this time?
Mm. Yeah, so for me, this is really, the core piece of why I choose to work with these medicines. And from a young age, there's always been this question of like, how do we change the world in essence? And in a way, not coming from a space of not loving the world that we're in, because I do think there's much beauty, but there is something that I feel a lot of us have in our hearts that we'd like to see expressed into the world, and whether that's a world of more love, more connection, more unity, less war. There's just that insight of wanting to see beautiful change and evolution for us all. And for me, one of the quickest ways of doing that, there's many paths to the top of the mountain. But psychedelics definitely have the aspect of being able to shift us at a rapid rate. And it's also in many cultures, in ancient cultures, they would only work with these medicines a lot of the time at a certain point of evolution. So when someone's been through some level of apprenticeship, and this is the same in the Andean tradition, eventually you grow to an ability of being able to encounter these medicines. And while I think that there's good reason and logic for that, and I can definitely understand backwardsly that I could have used more maturity in my early years of psychedelics in terms of being able to conceptualize and integrate the experiences that I had. I definitely think they have evolved, they have pushed my evolution leaps and bounds in very small amounts of time. There's times in which my consciousness has been stuck, and no other human being has been able to really provide the reflection needed. And at the end of the day, if we are building a new society and we are growing to this deeper level of trust, one of the things I will say is that I feel like the new earth is built on trust. It's the currency of the future is trust. But for us to come back into a level of trust, for this evolution to occur, and for a new game to be played that is not built on division, but rather built on a new unification, it needs to be an inside job. And unfortunately, when we've lost so much trust for each other, and we've lost our own clarity to see straight and see each other straight with our projection fields, an inside job is really the way to go. And this is where the plant medicines come in, is they allow you to work with your consciousness directly. They allow you to go inside and listen to what that innate capacity to heal is. It activates your own body intelligence. It activates your own inner wisdom. It allows you to tap into your own blueprint. And at this time on planet Earth, for me, if we're going to make any change, it's the best way to do that is for all of us to come into our innate gifts, our innate sense of love, responsibility, connection, relaxation, and trust ultimately, and that for me requires us going inwards, not outwards. And this is really the message of the plants, is how can we help you, but going inwards. And this is the reason why I work with them, in essence, is it really gives us that ability to really reflect and to heal some of the things that have not been able to heal through other means, through some of the means of outward interaction, and to receive information that we otherwise couldn't. And for me as well, I mean, working with plant medicines, not only are they themselves teachers, but they themselves are also energetic openers, portals, you can call them, to higher realms, to what we call the ancestral, or some people conceptualize it as the subconscious or the inner psyche. These are gateways that allow us to access these parts of ourselves that really hold the codes and keys for us to come into our own evolution, our own ascension, our own enlightenment, in a sense. And that's I think, in a nutshell, why I think they're really important at this time, for the way the Earth is going and the way that we're progressing as a species.
And Mishka, what are your thoughts on using these sacred medicines with regard to where they come from and, the ancestral connection of these plants to the peoples where they originally grow? It's quite a controversial subject.
Hmm.
To hear your thoughts on that.
It's a really big one, because I've also had to go through the process of saying, I think that there is an honoring of source, and there is parts of me. I've been through some hectic, reflections in my own life around the places in which I have felt not honored as the source of information, but in that also reflecting where I am not in honoring of the source of things. And to some degree, in the realm of separation, there are separate countries, there are separate beings, there are separate wisdom keepers that keep lineages. And in another sense, we are all ultimately connected, and this wisdom is supposed to be a birthright for all of us to engage in. So there is a balance between honoring the source and also realizing that we are all connected. And it's that balance of not taking things as entitlement because I'm human and I'm on this earth, but also honoring those that have been doing this for a long time and carry that wisdom. And so for me, it's been interesting because I've been a facilitator, for example, of San Pedro Huachuma, and this was long before I ever went to Peru or got initiated by anyone there. And I remember watching a conference with a wisdom keeper who carries the lineage and has been training people for a long time on how to hold space. And they actually asked them this question live. They said, but what about all these, like, essentially charlatans that are like holding space all over the world? And he said, they're not charlatans. The medicine is calling them. The medicine is calling them directly, and it's coming up all over the world. So if you've got on the calling, no matter what country you're in, to hold space with medicine, the medicine will train you directly now. And everyone was like, what? Because we expect the wisdom keeper to be shocked at people that are holding their medicine in another country. And he said, no, this is what the medicine has told me. The medicine is initiating people directly all over the world at this time, and that's the same with the mushrooms. It's a hard thing to believe, but sometimes when the lineage closes down, the mushrooms they're all over. They're ancient. They're the most ancient thing on this planet, and there's so many. I've met thousands of people that have worked with the medicine and have started being trained. And when you speak to other people, other facilitators that have been self-trained, like me, I've been self-initiated. A lot of the information we receive is the same. And this is the nice thing about being able to talk about it, is because we can actually reflect and learn from each other. And in a way, I'm very grateful for the lineages that I have met, because they have obviously been doing this for a lot longer. So they provide the clarity and the wisdom to carry that knowledge forward. But also understanding that direct experience is sometimes how this medicine is being carried through, especially when it's on such a global scale, where not everyone has the privilege of flying to the correct place and working with the lineage. You have people that are completely isolated that have access to the medicine and trusting that the plant can carry itself, the fungi can carry itself. They have their own strength. If they are strong enough to infiltrate the entire planet, they are strong enough to be able to initiate someone directly. And that's not to say it's necessarily the best way. So I just want to be clear on that, that it's not necessarily the best way. And I have myself, been in ayahuasca spaces where I've had people, I've sat with a Quinn, and the Icarus that was sung in that ceremony literally went in and pulling things out of my system, carrying these ancient songs that can literally heal us from the inside out, versus an ayahuasca space that is held by someone that has just been working with medicine for a couple of years. And by all means, also powerful. There was also deep healing in that, don't get me wrong. But there is a difference, there is a difference in the energy that is carrying it, and what you're working with and what is actually coming through. And there's also, I mean, it's a deep topic as well, because we talk about like what is space holding and the energetics of the room and what energies are coming in to do the work, and the greater beings that are coming through, and is it held in integrity, and what is coming through into the space. And there's a whole lot of questions that you can ask around that integrity and whether or not the lineage is something that's important. From my direct experience, I say that following your own intuition and your guidances is what's best. I used to say that following the lineage is a good way to go. And then I saw in the same situation working with an ayahuasca shaman who's not traditionally trained. And I use the word shaman loosely, but it's just so that people can understand what I'm generally referring to. But you can call it a guide or facilitator more correctly. And working with one that has not been lineage trained, but has been called by the medicine to sit with the medicine, has been serving for the last, I think, 9 years now. And that's actually where I sent my mom. And the reason why I sent my mom there and not to the lineage is because I've been traumatized sometimes by sitting with those that carry the lineage knowledge. Because in my capacity, coming from a Western point of view, I couldn't understand what they were saying. I couldn't understand what was happening to me. And as much as it might have been a deeper healing or awakening, it took me a long time to recover and integrate what had happened. And asking them questions, they couldn't answer questions in a way that my Western brain could understand. And and ultimately, when I actually healed my relationship to the medicine by sitting with non-lineage holders that could then take me through the process slowly, explain to me in a Western mind, what was happening. And even though you might say that the healing wasn't as deep, it was actually for me, because that was what I was ready for and what I was capable of holding at that moment in time. And so I don't think there's a right or a wrong. For me, it's just about respect. It's about listening to the intuition, and as a space holder, making sure that you're actually in integrity and not being too arrogant to say that you can't learn from a lineage, because they've been holding it for thousands of years. If you have the opportunity, learn from those that have been there before, pay respect, pay honor to the fact that they've brought it forward, but also don't be discouraged if you are being self-initiated, and don't be discouraged if your facilitator that you're called to isn't lineage trained, but you feel called to them. I say trust your intuition.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for that perspective. That's great to hear. And, speaking of the integrity with which ceremonies are held and how we work with these plants, what would you recommend to those who perhaps feel called to a particular plant medicine or psychedelic, but they have doubts, they don't know how to go about it, they have questions that need answering before they feel confident enough to take that deep dive? Yeah, is there somewhere they would go, yeah, to find these answers?
So for me, it depends, and for me this is like really meeting people where they're at and on their evolution journey. So you might meet someone that it's the first time they're taking psychedelics. They come from a very logical mind frame where their sense of safety is derived on their level of understanding something. And for them, I would say that research is important. Speaking to people that have experience is really important. Feeling out different people who might be available to hold space for you is important. Making sure all those components are safe. For someone who's maybe got a little bit more experience and is more in the space of learning to trust their intuition, I say follow your feeling, not your logical understanding. Then it's a different game. And so for me, it's hard to give a blanket statement for everyone. But even in saying this, I think people hearing it will already receive what is the right thing for them. It just depends where you are, like on your journey. But I say being well informed is a good place to go. And if you are hesitant, I always say walk before, or crawl before you walk, before you fly. So of course there's times when initiation is necessary, and going all the way in and just blasting through your ego structures is maybe the right thing to do, because that's what's relevant, but it's not always relevant. And there is the opportunity for you to first engage with something and meet it gently, we don't always have to be putting ourselves in these very difficult situations. And sometimes gentleness is a way to go. And so I say that if you're feeling called to like a flood dose of iboga, but you've never done plant medicine before, and there's a part of you that's like desperately scared, then sometimes I would say, okay, what is the calling really? And maybe it is that iboga is calling you directly, and that's very clear. But maybe you are looking to open up in a different way, and maybe starting with a low dose mushroom journey, or starting with microdosing first, and then increasing to something that's a little bit higher, so that you can first learn your consciousness, see how you respond, learn about yourself, and understand that the journey itself is a journey. Sometimes we go on multiple journeys before we get to the journey. Some people often say that psychedelics give you what you need, not what you want. But sometimes I say they actually do give you what you want, but sometimes we don't have the capacity to understand the answer. So we have to go through a whole lot of groundwork before we can even get the answer. So you think your whole journey was about something else completely, but it was actually just teaching you a whole lot of stuff that's required before it can even give you the answer that you're looking for. And so understanding that it's all part of the process, and sometimes what you think you're going to get to requires first a certain level of development and understanding. And that's really, where guidance can come in. If you have a guide that can take you through processes that can help you build to the place where you feel you want to go, or otherwise, if you have innate intuition, it will guide you, listening to your intuition, to the places that you need to be, to the conversations you need to have in order to build up the capacity to get to where you want to go. And that's kind of the way that I see this working. There's always a flow. For me, it's just about helping people tap back into that and really listening, and listening to the body and the guidance of the body as well, in terms of what it's needing and what it wants and what it can handle. And from a facilitator point of view, it's also listening to the person, listening beneath the words of what they're saying to what's actually being asked for, and that requires really having done a lot of inner self work, and generally quite ongoing work, to ensure that you are clean and clear and coming from a space of self integrity. And also listening to, like, for example, someone coming in that says they want to do like a high dose journey, but I can tell that their nervous system is completely burnt out. Then do they actually have the capacity to hold what's coming? And sometimes, if I tune into the medicine and I have a very direct connection with the medicine that I'm serving, I can feel that actually, no, it's a yes. Logically, it might not make sense because this person looks burnt out, but the medicine is saying that what I'm about to give them is actually going to help them see that for themselves, and then therefore I would go forward. But in another case, I might feel into someone and feel actually the medicine is saying no, and they go into a journey and they end up experiencing nothing, or they get such a hard smack that they don't come back for 5 years, and it's about like being able to tune into that. What's alive in this moment. People often ask me, like, how do I facilitate? Like, what happens if something goes wrong? What technique do I use? And I, sometimes I feel a bit awkward because I say, actually, my technique is unconditional loving presence. That's it. Because everything we need is available in the moment. It's just about how much can we drop the filters and listen and observe and, settle down the thought processes to actually feel into what's alive right here and right now. What's available as information in the field, what's available as information from your body, what's available as, in the interaction that we are sharing right now. And from there, how can we take that next step into the next moment? And that for me is everything. And these medicines, of course, teachers of that unconditional loving presence as well. Sometimes difficult teachers, but beautiful teachers nonetheless.
So going back to planetary evolution, as we were talking about, what do you feel are the major collective shadows holding us back from that, from evolving as a humanity?
Sure. So for me, one of the biggest ones is not being able to talk about some of these things. So for me, there's many times that we come into conversation and you notice that when you touch certain topics, people are like suddenly distracted or they kind of turn away. And for me, it's being able to look at those things that we haven't been able to speak about for quite some time. And in a way, for me, like breaking some of that shadow was putting psychedelic society like out there in the front. Like, okay, now it's here. What are you gonna do? It's what are you gonna do about it? And in a way, for me, for us to start ascending and evolving is having these moments of putting things on the table, like, okay, now what? Now what are we going to do? And for me, a lot of them revolve around sex, money, and power. I think those are some of the biggest collective shadows that we have that are holding us back. And it's power and control, whether you want to see it as a patriarchy, whether you want to see it as colonization, it's all coming from very similar roots that require an inside job. Each and every one of us have to be able to go into our psyches and look for those aspects of ourselves. Because if we are the whole, ultimately, all of us have to be able to figure out our personal parts of that collective shadow. Where are we the one that takes without consideration? Where are we the one that turns away, that feels self-righteous? Whereas it's all of that. It's a humbling process, but these things have to be discussed. They have to be looked at. They have to be shared. I often say that shame goes to die in safe spaces. And can we actually come together and talk about the things which I'm really ashamed to say? But chances are, when I say it out loud, 5 people in the room will say, "Oh, actually, I've had that experience too." And then suddenly it's a normalized thing. That's okay. And so it's about how do we unearth these things that are hiding in the psyche and understand that each of us has a part to play in doing that. And as we start doing that and making our processing public, which is also a very scary thing to do, but I think is highly important at this time, is yeah, it's kind of the path forward to being able to really start ascending. And I recently did a screening. I did 2 screenings of it. It's a film called The Village of Lovers, and essentially it's based on the community in Portugal called Tamera. That their incentive is to how do we live in a world of love that is void of fear. So how can we love each other without being held back by fear? And it's quite a deep thing. They speak a lot, and I've learned a lot from the people that have created this film around the tribal nervous system and how these big things that we feel are quite raw and vulnerable, but ultimately are collective things. And sometimes our nervous systems can't actually hold them, and so they come out in shadowy ways or ways that are suppressed or unable to really express in a clear way. And sometimes we do need that collective to come together and hold that piece that is coming through. Often, last year we had so much rupture in relationships globally, it seems like. And a lot of the time we have these things that are rupturing us because we're working with these big collective patterns that are working through our tiny little bodies that are trying to heal it. And we don't actually have the capacity to handle that rupture. So how do we repair after rupture? Because ultimately that is how a muscle heals itself, is by rupturing and then coming back together. But we can't hold that as individuals a lot of the time. We don't have the nervous system capacity. So how can we do this as a collective? How can we look at some of these things that are really hard to look at together and not turn away, not shy away, not hear someone's story and then turn a blind eye because it inconveniences our lives? I've been through a very big, personal experience in the last couple of months as well. I've going through a very hard situation in which a lot of my community couldn't look at it, and still benefited of things that were actively hurting me, resources that were actively taking away from me, but they couldn't address what was going on because ultimately that meant that parts of them have to suffer, you know. And in the same way, I met, a couple of years ago, I met 2 beautiful men from Israel, and they were sharing very tenderly. They were part of the movement of trying to get people to wake up and working with psychedelics and helping, just really, really beautiful human beings. But they said as well, growing up as men in Israel, there were mountains that they knew were not necessarily they had, in their words, were stolen mountains. But for them to feel like, okay, now those mountains have to be like returned, they said that's hard for them because as much as they want that and they feel like that's the right thing to do based in their words, they said it was also really hard because they love those mountains and they grew up with them. So it's like this moment of like inner conflict where it's like something that I want and that I love, but now I have to give it up. Why? Because of something that I wasn't even around for when it was decided on it. It's a deep inner conflict of and I think that that's really what's rippling through us all right now. And the more we like don't do anything about it and turn away from it or don't talk about it at least, the more it's going to wreck our lives individually because it needs to be looked at. So it's like either we can talk about it and we can find ways to at least process it consciously or in parts or in ceremony or whatever that might be, or we could experience it individually and have to solve it through our personal lives. And for me, this is one of the biggest hindrances at the moment is our inability to just talk about things and to just address them and put them on the table and heal and feel our part and to not judge each other as well when these shadows come up. For me, there's so much safety that can be created. It's if me and you are talking and something comes up and I say something and you're like, "Oh, wait, what was that?" And I'm like, "Oh, wow, what was that?" Like, even though I might be doing something that might be out of turn or shadowy, but to not hold judgment. And it's rather we're both looking at the thing that is just coming up through me that I am holding representation for. And this is where I love everyone to be, is in a space where we're not holding intense judgment, but we're just looking at what is moving. what is moving right now without any attachment to it, but noticing it and also ensuring that we work on it. We're not just going to leave it there, but like, okay, let's work with that now. How can we move that through the system and come back to love and peace and harmony? Because ultimately, that's what our hearts are really yearning for. Can we remember that? Can we sink into that? Can we come back to that? And for me, that's the space that I'd love everyone to be in. And it's a space I think that so many of us want to be in. We've just forgotten how.
Beautiful words of wisdom.
Mm.
Thank you. And Mishka, I know your journey is very connected to where you are, your location. You live in Cape Town and you have a deep connection to the land. Would you share a little bit about that and also extending that to, how our connection to the land in general plays a role in our evolution, our path of ascension with sacred sites or just the land in general?
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, this is in terms of where I feel my work, I'm going through a big transition at the moment, and where some of my work has really been pulled towards is actually focusing on, yeah, working more with the earth itself and the land. And that is in the sense that I feel, the sites, the mountains, the rivers, all of these carry codes, they carry information. And many ancient cultures know this, in the Andean tradition as well. We go under the tutelage of mountains. We go to different rivers to be initiated by the river itself. And in African culture as well, they work with water spirits, and this is something that is known by every ancient culture there is. The Bushmen as well, they go under the moon under eclipses for specific reasons. They use the fire for communication, for telepathy learning. There's all of these ancient wisdom keepers understand this principle, and it's something that we've also forgotten. I see this happening. I was called back to Cape Town a number of years ago, and I knew exactly where I was going to live. I'd never lived in that area before. I knew I was going to live there before I arrived. And when I arrived, I ended up, in a relationship and lived exactly in the place that I thought I was going to live. And I was initiated by the mountain. All of these things started coming about because ultimately, Cape Town is one of the energy centers on the planet. It's a vortex. It's an energy. Yeah, it's a potent space. And I'm looking at the mountain now, actually, and there's been so many people in the last few years, and I hear the story so many times where, oh, I'm here from this country, and I've just felt the call to come to Cape Town, and now that I'm here, I don't want to leave. And of course, it's a beautiful place, and there's many reasons, but a lot of the people that are coming in are saying that there's something deeper that they're feeling called to, and a lot of them are saying, their innate gifts are starting to come online here. They're starting to receive information about themselves. They're shedding away the layers that no longer serve them, shedding away the patterns, and in a sense, that's what it is. It's this strong mirroring and refinement process that happens around these energy centers, and each of them across the world have their own. In the last few years, I sat in meditation and I was called to different parts of the planet. I was called to Bali, which has its own energetic grid. I was called to Peru, in which I did multiple initiations there and spoke to the land itself. And I was called to India as well, which has its own energetic principles as well. And each of them has their own coding in a sense that we get called and activated with. And Africa, I mean, it's robust, and this is the thing that I find quite sad, is that in a sense we have these understandings around all the spiritual hubs around the world, such as people going to India, for example. And yes, it is potent. The Ganges, in terms of like cleansing karma, and there's a lot that happens all over the show, but we've lost some of the principles of what can happen here in Africa. For me, it's one of the least spoken about places that holds so much wisdom and potential and activation codes that are necessary for us to fully activate as a species. We need all of the codes, not just part of them. And so I am really excited. In a way, I'm upset that the digital nomads that are coming in and raising the prices of things, but I'm also grateful that it's also people that are willing to come and receive the activations of this land. Because for me, this is the global ascension that's happening, and it is important for whatever the coding is that's happening here to spread out, to the rest of the land. I'll be camping with the Bushmen now. I'll be going to Africa Burn, and there's something that's really beautiful that's happening at the camp that I'm in, is a water ceremony, and it's bringing together all the waters that everyone in the camp has collected from their local water reserves or from any parts of the world that they've been. Because one of the elders has said that it's important for our waters, our internal waters, to start remembering each other and to start meeting each other. And so we're bringing the waters of the planet together for them to start interacting with each other. And I've had that recently. I was in Peru, and I went to Lake Titicaca, and I received some water there, and I had a bracelet, an anklet that I was wearing that a woman there had woven, that I went and I blessed in the river, and was a little black and white one that represented the masculine and the feminine and the coming together of polarities. And I'd worn this for a while, and it was doing its work with me. And when I was in the garden route last, I actually felt the calling to take this off and to give it into the waters. And as I did, I felt this huge energy return to me from the waters as a blessing, because the waters were thankful, saying that you've actually managed to connect us again. And there's so many people that are going around the world and connecting reconnecting the energetics of the planet. There's so much grid work that's happening. Of course, I think many people know Matthias de Stefano, and he's also part of the grid work that's happening. But there's so many of us that are also doing our parts now to actually start collecting, and transferring the codes of the planet. In a way, our energy bodies are also, it's like, in the way that animals can collect seeds and walk and they drop seeds somewhere else, we're also code carriers, if we open ourselves to that level of understanding. And it is important to be able to shift codes around, go to things, honor things, bring back ritual to land, honor the land, connect to the land, listen to the ways of the land, receive the insights from the land that has ultimately been lost for a long time. And one of the beautiful things with the Andean tradition is like the despacho ceremony. And in many countries that practice has been lost. It's such a beautiful, beautiful way of honoring, of calling in, and it's also just such a potent portal activation for people to transmute through, that we've really lost these ways of really being with each other and being with land and receiving the insights from the land and being healed by the land. There's so many modalities that we have to heal this, remove that. And I mean, I'm one, I've dipped my finger into every pie that I could possibly get my fingers into. But it's to go and take my heaviness and sit in the ocean and give it to something greater is something so simple, but so powerful that we have completely forgotten we can do. But instead I have to go pay 5,000 Rand for a series of cleansings from someone from, I don't know, Bolivia that's brought some modality for me. Whereas I honor that by all means, but can I just go to my local lake? Can I remember the lakes on top of Table Mountain and remember that is my mother over there that has waters for me to go and bathe in, you know? And so I do think that it's about also respecting the land that we're on and understanding the codes of the land that we're on. And for me, it's been an interesting process. I've traveled the world and I've met wisdom keepers from all walks of life, and I've learned so many modalities. And to be honest, only now am I really actually diving into the land that I'm on. My biggest calling at the moment is actually understanding the wisdom of the Bushmen, you know, of seeing the nama, of seeing the healing dances, of experiencing what they're experiencing, understanding the energies that they channel. And it's so sad because when we hear about it, every single week there's one that's dying, and whenever, an elder dies, that's a library that is burnt down. And there aren't that many people that are learning this knowledge. By blessings, there are some, but there's not that many. We don't have that influx like South America does, for example, of spiritual travelers that are wanting to learn this, and that channel, that open way, that support, that financial infrastructure. We don't really have that. And so for me, it's also about understanding the importance at this time of understanding what these wisdom keepers have to share, because those codes are also important. We can't complete a puzzle without the pieces, you know. They are guardians of the different gates, and understanding that we have to respect those guardians. And yes, the people that have been here for the longest will have those codes, they have those knowledge because they've been working with the land for the longest. But so too does the land. So too, it's important to go to these caves, to go to these sites, to go to these gates, to honor the mountains, to listen to why they're calling, and that's for me, that's everything. And I think Africa is one of those untouched places. It's an untold story. We've heard these other stories. What about Africa's story?
Absolutely. Sure. Thank you for that. Oh, you've just reminded me of so many things. My own personal story with Cape Town as well, and how I returned to the country, and yes, this deep wisdom that this land holds. Thank you so much, Mishka. We're coming to the end of our time together, and something I ask all the speakers at the end of our call is, what is your personal prayer? What is your vision for Africa in this case, for this event, but also for our planet, all of humanity.
Oh, yeah, my personal prayer, and specifically I'll start with Africa because it's where I feel the deepest pain is in being able to return to the knowledge that we have everything that we need. And in the sense that, if we could just take a moment to actually turn inwards and look behind us and look within us and around us, there's so much gold, there's so much wisdom, there's so much resource that is available that we don't need to go out there. In fact, the job is to actually uncover this, value it, realize what it is, so that we can share it in a way that is filled with honor, respect, and integrity with the world. And I find as a collective, I have the same wish that if each of us as individuals has that same ability to do that with our inner gifts, our inner wisdom, and the resources that we provide, we'd live in a completely different world. We'd all be bringing our gifts to the surface. We'd all be playing our parts, bringing the piece of the puzzle that we hold forward to the collective. And when we each have that in fullness, the whole piece can come together. The whole puzzle can work. The whole grid can move into a higher plane. The whole game of this planet can change. And so for me, that's my deepest wish, is for that to happen. And I think that a lot of things will change. A lot of respect will be paid. A lot of honoring will be paid to ourselves, to what we bring forward. And exploitation will be less. There's so many things that could correct just if we all had this peace. And so that's my prayer.
Beautiful. May it be so.
Mm.
Thank you for this inspiring conversation and everything that you've shared with us. Thank you for this amazing work that you're doing of educating and raising awareness and resourcing. And I believe you're sharing a gift with our audience. Would you tell us what that is?
Yeah, so I've sent a code to you, I think that's valid until the 1st of May. And that is for a discount on the Psychedelic Society shop. So anyone that is looking for supplements that might be able to help them, whether it's microdosing, there's various things that are available on the Psychedelic Society shop. So if you'd like to, you can go there and you can receive a discount for anything that you'd like from the shop. Yeah, I think the code is Africa Rise 12, so it's 12% off.
Yes, that's right. Thank you so much for that. And thank you to everyone who's tuned into this interview. And yeah, many blessings, and see you at the next one. Thank you again, Mishka. It's lovely to see you again.
Sure. Yeah, thank you.